بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Inshallah, in today's class, we will take, picking up from where we left off, we're going to take issues 11, 12, and 13. Issue 11, we are going to talk about what is the, let us say, the inner or the philosophical nature of the command form, if'al. When we say if'al, to act, to do the basic generic structure of the command form, are we talking about the essence of the issue? Are we talking about that the act needs to be done once, more than once? Is it an option? These are things that the usulis are concerned with. And sometimes these conversations seem to be random and maybe a little bit obtuse, but they have implications when you get into the very details of usul al fiqh, especially when you're talking about actually applying the law in a court case situation or in a fatwa situation. Issue 12, we are going to talk about is the command meaning that you do it once or it can be made up, or if it's not done, does it require a new command? In other words, there's an open command, do A, and what happens if you miss A? Do you just make that A up, or there has to be a new command, a renewal of the command, that is? And then if you are commanding someone to do something, does that also mean that you have to do that? And is it possible, rationally possible, if I command somebody to do something, if I command you to do something, can you designate somebody else, delegate somebody else to do that? Especially in regards to devotional acts. So Allah Ta'ala tells us to pray. Well, I don't feel like praying. Can I have someone else pray for me on my behalf? Those are the kind of questions that we're going to look at there. And then in issue 13, we are going to differentiate the command to do action A. Is it also a prohibition against the opposite of A, or is it only directed towards the act itself? I know it seems kind of philosophical. It is kind of, and those are the things that we're going to discuss, and hopefully I'll make that clear as we begin the lectures, inshallah. All right, so we will begin the way we normally begin, which is we will turn to the original text, inshallah. Let me just get my page number. Unfortunately, the book I have is quite heavy. Well, I guess that's good because that means it includes everything. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Yes. Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. قال المصنف رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلومه في الدارين آمين. وعندنا أن الحسن والقبح بمعنى ترتب الذم حالا والعقاب مآلا شرعيان. So he says, rahimahullah, for us, the Ash'ari schools, that which is good or evil, al-husn wal-qubh. So these are kind of concept or terms. That which is good and evil as it relates to potential criticism in this world and potential punishment in the hereafter are defined by the Sharia alone. That's a mouthful, right? That's the translation of what we just read. So let's splice that up, because this is, there are huge ramifications to that simple sentence. So, in the Ash'ari school, for us, as we said in the beginning, Shaykh al-Islam is writing in this way to, number one, define what the madhab of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah is, and also to also give you a concept and an idea of what the Mu'tazilites have said as opposed to that, and why that is not considered the orthodox theological position. So he says, for us in the Ash'ari school, that which is good and evil. So there's good and evil in the world. Is good and evil something that is completely, solely defined by the intellect, by reason, or is it something that is solely defined by the Sharia? What do we mean by that? What we mean by that is that what the Mu'tazilites are saying is that they are aqliyan. They are only and firstly defined by reason, and then confirmed by revelation. So the Mu'tazilites posit, and this is why they are falsely referred to as the rationalists. And this is, this is I'll just use the word because I think this is a ridiculous theological, it's absurd that reason alone and reason firstly can capture whether something is good and bad. Certainly there are many, many things in life that we know rationally that are good and bad. But how do you know that entering the mosque and praying 2 rak'ahs to greet the mosque is good? Unless you know that from the Sharia. Because if you don't believe, if you're not a Muslim, or you don't know any of those things, or you have no access, you're a Muslim, you grew up in a Muslim family and identity with a Muslim name, but you really don't have any access to knowledge, no one took you to like a Sunday school or something like that. How will you know that that's good? Rationally, there's no reason to that. That's why this is a religion, it's not a rational philosophy. So what we say is that it is the Sharia that defines the good and the bad as it relates, and that's why I translated this way, as it relates to potential criticism in this world and potential punishment in the hereafter. So when we put those conditions to what we're talking about, only the Sharia can define that. So in other words, there's a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ forbade us, nahana, on the tashabuk, to go like this in the mosque. The fuqaha understand that this is something that's disliked. There's no way that you will rationally know that unless it comes from an athar, it comes from a revealed text, in this case the hadith. So therefore, I could be criticized, my shaykh can criticize me if I go like this in the mosque, be like, don't cross your fingers, tariq in the mosque, that's incorrect. So there's potential criticism here, and then God forbid if somebody engages in the haram act here, there can be potential punishment for it in the hereafter. And the reason I say potential punishment, because Allahu ghafurun rahim. Okay, I could go on and on about that, but I've already taken up too much time on this subject, so let's move forward. And then he says, rahimahullah, وأن شكر المنعم واجب بالشرع وأنه لا حكم قبله بل الأمر موقوف إلى وروده. So the two things is, he says, likewise for us it is obligatory as established in the Sharia to be thankful to our Lord. Again, we are saying that this comes from the Sharia point of view, that we are thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all of the things that we have been given, whereas the Mu'tazilites say this is something that is rationally established. Now, the reason these things are important is because we say as Sunnis, as Ash'aris, that there is no taklif, there is no legal and moral responsibility until one has received a message, which is the next thing that we'll talk about. The next theme that he talks about is, for us there is no Sharia ruling before the revelation of the Sharia. Rather, such issues are left to when they appear, إِلَى الْوُرُودِ, when they come. And this is based on the verse, وَمَا كُنَّا مُعَذِّبِينَ حَتَّى نَبْعَثَ رَسُولًا. We do not punish a people. In other words, we do not hold them morally and legally responsible until they have been given a message. So for us, if there's somebody out there that does not receive the message, or as Imam al-Ghazali says, if there's somebody out there that receives an incomplete message or a partial message or incorrect message about the deen, they have no taklif. So therefore for us this is something that is established by the Sharia and revelation, not by reason. The Mu'tazilites are saying it doesn't matter where you are and who you are and when you are and what you have received, you are responsible. So if there's somebody out there, miskeen, who never knew about Islam or the religion or anything like that, the Mu'tazilites are basically saying that person will be punished for not accepting, because it's something that they should rationally be able to capture. And that's why I said it's a theological absurdity. I mean, how on earth can such a person even find their way? Why are we saying it's an absurdity? Because we were saying we only know how to do this through revelation, through the Quran and through the Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Okay, now based on this, just sort of a little tangent, the Mu'tazilites, they have an issue of, well, what happens if rationally we can't capture what the Sharia ruling is? So they'll say, and we dispute all three of these, but they have three positions. The first position is that thing is by default haram. So if I can't understand what the Sharia ruling is for like eating fruits, for example, that's the example that Shaykh al-Islam gives, then it's al-hadr, it's haram, I have to stay away from it. The second opinion is that it's its opposite, it's mubah. So all things, until the intellect can capture them, then they are permissible. And then the third thing is, well, it's, as the Mu'tazilites say, often it's something that's stuck in a position between the two positions. So a tawaqquf, we withhold judgment, neither this, neither that. Of course, from our point of view, that's highly problematic because we are saying, no, وَمَا كُنَّا مُعَذِّبِينَ حَتَّى نَبْعَثَ رَسُولًا. Now, as for us, when it comes to default rulings of things, that will come later in the text. But the foreshadow is the default ruling of things is basically that it is permissible. We took this in the waraqat. It's permissible until something comes along that makes it haram. The default ruling in things that have to do with gender relations is it's haram until something comes and makes it permissible, etc. Okay, and then he talks about legal responsibility at taklif. So he says, rahimahullah, وَالْأَصَحُّ امتناع تكليف الغافل والملجأ للمكره. Now this is a very short sentence, but I kind of elongated the translation with examples. The correct opinion, this is their legal responsibility, taklif. The heedless person, like the person who's sleeping. Al-mulja, the person who has no choice. We'll give an example, like somebody who's been thrown from the top of a building, may Allah Ta'ala protect us. And the mukrah, the person who's been coerced to do something. Is there legal responsibility for those people? So the translation of what I read is, the correct opinion is that there is no legal responsibility for the heedless person, such as someone absent-minded, or someone asleep, or someone who forgot, and the one with no choice, such as someone thrown from a building. However, the coerced person still has legal responsibility. So this is a little bit of a meaty thing. So this is an example, because this is an early lecture, this is an example of when I translate, rather than just kind of give you a verbatim word-by-word translation, I'm trying to add the examples that you're going to find from the commentary in the translation, so that when you read it, you kind of have a sense of what that means. I'll pick up the discussion in the next clip, inshallah. Okay, so here we're talking about the legal responsibility, a taklif, of the heedless person, the one with no choice, and the coerced person. So the issue is, if somebody is heedless, the best example of someone who is ghafil, heedless, is the person who is asleep, because the person who is asleep, it's a form of death, وَاللَّهُ يَتَوَفَّاكُمْ فِي مَنَامِكُمْ. Allah Ta'ala causes you, the Quran refers to it as a type of death. Al-wafa versus al-maut. Al-maut is the soul has left the body completely, that's like death. But al-wafa, it's what we refer to sleep, but it's also a word for death, which is interesting. Here's not the place to talk about that, but that's interesting. So, if the person is asleep, they're not in control, and their involuntary nervous system, is taking over their breathing and the circulation of the blood and things like that, but they're not morally responsible. So if a sleeping person was sleepwalking and did something or said something, they would not be responsible morally and ethically and legally responsible for those things. And in the example in my translation, I also say somebody who's absent-minded or who forgot. So you are fasting and you haven't been fasting for some time. You decided to fast today, and a couple hours into the day you have a sip of water, and then, oh, subhanallah, I'm fasting, astaghfirullah azim. Okay, well, you forgot. So there's no taklif in that moment. In that moment you have been forgiven for that act. And then likewise the person with no choice. And the example of this, or the best example that you'll find in almost all of the books of usul, is the person who has been thrown from a building. At the moment that that they're falling, they can't but fall, because it's the laws of gravity that are bringing them down. There's nothing that they can do to avoid that act. So at that point, they are not going to be legally responsible for what happens when they land, or if they landed on somebody, or if they killed somebody by landing on them, we say that there is no taklif at that moment because they are mulja. They had no choice in the matter. However, and this is a debate within the schools, and that's why he begins within the Sunni schools of usul, and that's why he begins by saying al-asah, and so I translate the correct position, is that the person who is coerced is legally responsible. So somebody puts a gun to your head and says, if you don't kill this person, I'm going to kill you. This is the coerced person. So we say, in other words, the dominant position, the correct position in the usul, amongst the usuli schools, is that such a person is legally responsible. And they might be forgiven for what they do when they are coerced, but they can always choose the option of being patient in face of that oppression. So somebody puts a gun to your head and says, if you don't kill this person, if you don't kill this child, I'm going to kill you. Okay, kill me then. I'm not going to do that. You could do that. I mean, it's obviously a tall order and it's the end of your life, and that's very difficult. But because there is that option, there is the taklif, whereas in the other two categories, that option doesn't exist because the ghafil person is at that moment is completely not in control, and the person that's been thrown from the building obviously is not in control. So that's why they say there's no taklif at that moment. But this person, the coerced person, they could be, they could take a licking, they could take a beating. Now, in the case of somebody killing somebody that's coerced, we don't put moral blame that they took a life, but we take the moral blame is that they chose one life over the existence of their life, which is a subtle kind of legal and moral commentary that I hope you will remember, because it's something that's very unique in the literature of Islamic law, is that you might not, the punishment of taking a life unjustly might not follow you because you were coerced, but we do say that there is taklif, and the stain is that you have preferred one person's life over another, because we honor all human life. Okay, and then he says, وَيَتَعَلَّقُ الْخِطَابُ عِنْدَنَا بِالْمَعْدُومِ تَعَلُّقًا مَعْنَوِيًّا. And for us, Ahlul Sunnah, the eternal and uncreated speech of God can relate to something yet uncreated through meaning, and not as it relates to the actual thing. This is the ta'alluq that we talked about in the Jawhara, in the Theology 1, تعلق معنويا أو تعلق تنجيزيا. Now for the Mu'tazilites, they reject Allah Ta'ala's internal speech, al-kalam al-nafsi. So for them, there is no ta'alluq ma'nawiyan. So for us, we have that, which is that something can relate, the ta'alluq, it can relate to something in meaning, that's ma'nawiyan, or tanjiziyan, or something actual. So for us, we say that there's something that's yet been uncreated. So there's some kind of like a new AI technology that's just around the corner that we don't know about, or maybe by the time you watch this, it's already existing. But so something like that has been uncreated, and then we say that there is a hukm of Allah Ta'ala, there is an eternal uncreated speech of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala directed towards that thing. So for us Sunni Muslims, we say, as Ash'aris, we say that Allah Ta'ala's speech relates to that thing through meaning, al-ma'nawiyan, not to the actual thing, tanjiziyan, because it hasn't happened yet. Whereas for the Mu'tazilites, it's a little bit more clunky, because they've denied the ma'nawiyan part, because they've denied Allah Ta'ala's internal speech, al-kalam al-nafsi. And as I said in the beginning, they're like the punching bag, but all joking aside, these are very problematic theological positions that the Mu'tazilites had. And the idea, again, I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but the idea that they're like the rational people and we're the irrational people, as you can see, that's not the case. They're falsely called the rational people because of what we talked about in the first clip, that they feel and they argue that the reason and reason alone and reason first can understand what is good and what is bad as it relates to criticism in this world and potential punishment or reward in the hereafter. Now that's highly, highly problematic, because people's reason is flawed. Not everyone's reason is not the same. There are some things that we know, 1 plus 1 is 2, and the sum is equal to the whole is equal to the sum of its parts and things like that. But those are, those type of empirical or rational concepts, okay, we get them equally as human beings. But when it comes to things of religion and ibadat, acts of worship and things like that, I mean, no, it has to come through revelation, or else we won't, or else we could just make this all up our own selves. And if we make it all up, it was going to change, because as we change the way we think about it. So I find that to be highly dangerous, actually, and problematic. Okay, I could go on and on, but I have to kind of hold myself back. Okay, now we're going to talk about the division of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's speech, which basically is the 5 ahkam of the Sharia. So this should be pretty straightforward, but we'll read and go through it. I see that I'm running out of time, but we'll try to get a couple of them in. At least let me read the Arabic. Okay. فإن اقتضى فعلا غير كف اقتضاء جازما فالإيجاب أو غير جازم فالندب أو كفا جازما فتحريم أو غير جازم بنهي مقصود فكراهة أو بغير مقصود فخلاف الأولى أو خير فإباحة وعرفت حدودها. So he says, rahimahullah, and I'll just read the translation. If God's eternal uncreated speech relates to an action that should be acted upon absolutely, then it is an obligatory act. Or if this speech relates to an action to be acted upon not absolutely, it is a permissible act. If this speech relates to an action that is not to be acted upon absolutely, then it is an act. Then the act is impermissible. Or if the speech relates to an action not to be acted upon absolutely, then it is disliked. If the speech relates to an action not to be acted upon but not specifically, then such an act is contrary to what is preferable, khilaful awla. And lastly, if the speech relates to an act in which one is given the option to act or not to act, then such an act is permissible, ibaha. So I know that you know these because we've talked about them in the waraqat, but we are going to go through them again because I want you to notice how he phrases them, because the phraseology that he uses, which is obviously taken from the phraseology of Jam' al-Jawama, is going to be the phraseology of advanced Usul al Fiqh, to do an act and not do an act and things like that. I know you know the ahkam of the 5 are. The other thing that's unique that we'll get to in the next clip is the concept of khilaful awla, and then I want to give you a difference of opinion within our madhab of usul about a sunnah al-mandub and things like that. So we'll pick it up in just a moment. Okay, so he says, rahimahullah, if God's eternal uncreated speech, and that's how I translate khitabullah, because that's what it means. It means Allah's eternal uncreated speech, because we are Ash'aris, not Mu'tazilites. So I don't say Allah's speech, I say eternal and uncreated, kalamullah al-qadim. That's what Allah's the definition for us is. So when I find the khitabullah, Allah's speech, that's how I translate it to emphasize, because this is what Shaykh al-Islam is trying to get across, and likewise I want to make sure that you get that across as well. If God's eternal uncreated speech relates to an action that should be acted upon absolutely, and you have to do this act, then it's a wajib. So the wajib act is something that you have to do. If when you do it, you are rewarded, and if you do not do it, you are punished. Or if the speech relates to an action to be acted upon but not absolutely, so there's a speech, do it, but it's not an absolute thing, then it is permissible. Then it is a permissible act. Mandub. And the mandub act means if you do it, you are rewarded, and if you do not do it, there's no sin. If this speech relates to an action that is not to be acted upon absolutely, you absolutely cannot do this act, then it is considered impermissible or haram. So the haram act is, if you do the haram act, you incur a sin, and if you do not do it, you incur a reward. Or if the speech relates to an action not to be acted upon but not absolutely, then it is simply disliked, makruh. The makruh act, if you do the makruh act, you receive no sin, but if you stay away from it, you receive a reward. And as I've said in the waraqat class, notice how most of these acts, other than the haram acts, are acts that you can do in varying degrees. And then he says, if this speech relates to an action not to be acted upon, but not specifically, then it is considered khilaful awla, contrary to what is preferable. And this is something that might be new to us. Like somebody who breaks their fast when they're traveling. It's permissible because the traveling state is a state in which you can break your fast, whether it's a fard fast or a sunnah fast, all right? If you have the right conditions for the travel's halal, so on and so forth. But it's khilaful awla. It's not preferable. The preferable thing is to continue fasting. So this is a new term in the fiqh to help reconcile the terminology between the mutakallimun and the fuqaha, because this is a term that you will find with the Hanafis. And that's why I translated as, if such a speech relates to an action not to be acted upon but not specifically. So there's no specific prohibition against breaking the fast when you're traveling, but it's not mustahab, it's just permissible, so we call it khilaful awla. It's preferable, it's against what is preferable. And then he says, if the speech relates to an act in which one is given the option to act or to not to act, it's the ibaha or mubah, so this is the neutral thing. Okay, now the khilaful awla, you can think of it as a station between the kiraha and the ibaha. So the kiraha is disliked, like eating garlic and going to the mosque and praying, and onions, raw onions and garlic, because you're going to smell bad. So it's not haram to do that, but it's disliked. So leaving it is better. That's a disliked act because there's something specific in that. There's a specific text and hadith and traditions about that. The ibaha is, it's just, I'm going to eat an orange now, or should I eat an apple? Well, you can choose whatever you want. There's nothing specific. The khilaful awla is in between, because it might be permissible to break your fast when break your fast while you're traveling, but obviously it's going to be better in that case to continue the ibadah along with the mashaqqa, because taklif, or legal responsibility, is something that has kulfa in it. It's something that has a little bit of difficulty in it. And you have to get up, make wudu, and pray salat al-dhuhr. It's easy just to sit and be lazy. So there's a little bit of action that you have to do. So to fulfill that little bit of action, it's better to complete the act. Okay. Next, the synonyms of fard and wajib. وَالْأَصَحُّ تَرَادُفُ الْفَرْدِ وَالْوَاجِبِ كَالْمَنْدُوبِ وَالْمُسْتَحَبِّ وَالتَّطَوُّعِ وَالسُّنَّةِ وَالْخُلْفُ لَفْظِيٌّ. Now, the correct opinion, okay, so here we're arguing with inside the schools of usul. The correct opinion is that the words fard and wajib are synonyms for obligatory acts, just like the words mandub, mustahab, tatawwu, and sunnah are all synonyms for permissible acts. The difference between these words are simply linguistic and carry no actual difference in law. Now, obviously, that's not the Hanafi position. That's the dominant position in the schools of Sunni fiqh. For the Hanafis, the difference between the fard and the wajib is the following. The fard in the Hanafi madhab is that act which has been deduced from a qat'i evidence, a Quran or a mutawatir hadith. If the evidence that produces the obligatory act is less than that, it's like an ahad hadith, then it is a wajib, not a fard. So for them, there's an actual difference, which is why, like, they'll pray, witr prayer all the time, and they'll call it a fard, not a wajib. which is why there has to be some Quranic recitation in the prayer, but you don't have to necessarily recite Surah Al-Fatiha, etc., because it's where the evidence comes from. The dominant schools of Sunni usul, our camp, which we are the dominant because we encompass the three schools and more of the past schools in the past, etc., is that they are synonyms. Wajib and fard for us are synonyms. And then likewise, the mandub, the mustahab, tatawwa and sunnah are all synonyms for permissible acts. However, we have a position within our camp as well that there is a slight difference. I don't know why when I prepare I always know where it is, and then when I'm recording I can never find the exact quote that I'm trying to find. The other position is, if the Prophet ﷺ did something, usually it's called a sunnah. Just one second. Astaghfirullah al-Azim. Sorry. If the Prophet ﷺ did something, it's called a sunnah. If he did it once or twice, it's called mustahab. And if he did not do it, but we are doing it from our own, like we're going to read a certain amount of Quran or recite a certain type of awrad and litany, then it's a tatawwa. So, slight difference in the definition. The majority of our madhab in usul says that they're all synonyms. At-tatawwa, mustahab, sunnah, etc. And we say that if you even looked at that opinion inside Usul al Fiqh, in our madhab, al-khilafu lafzi, it's just a linguistic difference. It does not carry any actual consequential difference in the law. And then he says, rahimahullah, وَإِنَّهُ لَا يَجِبُ إِتْمَامُهُ وَوَجَبَ فِي النُّسْخِ لِأَنَّهُ كَفَرْضِهِ نِيَّةً وَغَيْرِهَا. And then he says, the correct opinion is that a permissible act does not need to be completed, meaning you can start a sunnah act and then stop it, but it must be completed when intending a permissible pilgrimage rite in Hajj or Umrah, as the intention to enter the state of pilgrimage renders the obligatory act to complete. Likewise in some other aspects of law. So for the Hanafis, if you start a sunnah act, you got to complete it. But for us, if you start the sunnah act, you don't have to, except in the Hajj, because when you enter into the nusuk, then these sunnah things need to be completed because they take on an obligatory act with the nusuk. And then lastly he says, وَالسَّبَبُ وَصْفٌ ظَاهِرٌ مُنْضَبِطٌ مُعَرِّفٌ لِلْحُكْمِ. Causes are desirable, exterior, measurable and defining of the ruling. Conditions, causes, that's what I read. Causes are describable, exterior to the hukm, measurable, so you can measure the zawal of the sun to begin the dhuhr prayer, measurable and defining of the ruling. And this begins the discussion of the ahkam al-wada'iyya, which we'll pick up in tomorrow's lecture. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam, wa sallallahu ala sayyidina wa mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Okay, alhamdulillah, we finished the second lecture, and I also want to, ask for your indulgence. Sometimes when I begin a new text or a new module, the first couple lectures, I'm just not, I got to get my groove of how to do it. And I think I kind of rushed at the very end. I will compensate in the following lecture. But anyway, for today's lecture, what did we talk about? We talked about good and evil, how they're defined by the Sharia, not rationally, as opposed to the Mu'tazilites. We talked about giving thanks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for everything He's given us. That is a concept that is established from the Sharia, not rationally. And then we said that there's no ruling prior to the existence of revelation in the Sharia. And then these three theological points are established by Shaykh al-Islam to define what we say as Sunni Muslims, as opposed to the Mu'tazilites, who prefer or advance the reason above all of these things. And then we talked about legal responsibility on the heedless, the one with no choice, and the coerced. We said that there is no legal responsibility on the heedless and the one with no choice, but there is still legal responsibility on the coerced person, because the coerced person could be patient and take a licking even if it cost them their life. Then we talked about God's speech as it relates to non-existent things, and how we said it is a ta'alluq ma'nawiyan, it is connected to through meaning, not tanjiziyan, not the actual thing. And then we looked at the division of God's eternal uncreated speech, which is basically the subject or the section that introduces the 5 ahkam al-shar'iyya. And then we added to that khilaf al-awla, which is a state between the makruh and the mubah. Then we looked at the synonyms in the majority of the Sunni schools of usul of fard and wajib, noting that the Hanafis have a difference based on the evidentiary text strength that they find to produce that. And then we also looked at the synonyms of the mandub, mustahab, tatawwa, and sunnah, and that there are differences of opinion even with our madhab about those words, but those differences are linguistic and not consequential. And then we looked at the permissibility of not completing a sunnah act as opposed to the Hanafis, except in the situation of Hajj. And then we began the discussion of causes, which I kind of rushed through, which we will pick up in tomorrow's lecture. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina wa Mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.